Ticky, we'll start with you first. What do you make of the fact the projections were actually bang on this time?
Yeah, I mean, staggeringly unsurprising, really. And for those terribly, terribly excited about the possibility of a recession, a technical recession, well, congratulations, you've got it. Because we know that, as Craig was saying, everything but the kitchen sink was thrown at this for the March quarter. Well, the kitchen sink has been thrown at the June quarter. So we are going to see us falling off a cliff in the June quarter. The really interesting thing, and I think what everybody should be focused on, is what will happen in the September quarter, which is the quarter around recovery. So, as I say, really very predictable, and I agree with Craig. I think despite everything, we've managed remarkably well.
Well, September feels like a lifetime away at the moment, considering this has all happened in just a few months. Kieran Gilbert, what are your thoughts on this? Is this going to be received as good news by the government?
Yeah, it will be. As Craig said, it's quite an impressive number when you look at the rest of the world. A couple of points to make. This, Annalise, is a moment. As Craig said, it took a pandemic to do it, but it ends the longest run of expansion of any advanced economy in the world, 29 years. We fell short of the 30 years. That, of course, the last recession was 1991. We fell just short of it. 29 years, not a bad run, but as Craig said, we had the fires, the pandemic as well. But that, I would caution against comparisons with other nations in the March quarter, like, you know, for example, China, 9.8% down for that March quarter, Germany, France, Italy. They were all hit by the coronavirus much earlier than us. So there is a bit of a lag effect. We are now technically in recession. We know Q2 will be negative. So the first recession since 1991 and ending that historic run of economic growth, which has been a phenomenon. But I think overall, still, the economy is shrinking by 0.3%. And given what has transpired in that start of the year, the pandemic really the back half of March, so not a massive impact in Q1 from the coronavirus, but we had enough already to deal with. So, yeah, in answer to your question, Annalise, I think they will see it as a positive.
Yeah, we've gone from the recession we had to have to the one we couldn't avoid. And if we look at some of the things where that is down, what's detracted from that growth, it's things like accommodation and food services, transport, postal, warehousing, arts and recreation services. Andrew Clennell, what do you think the focus is going to be now for the government in that September quarter that Ticky rightly pointed out is going to be the one to watch?
Well, it's when JobKeeper ends, isn't it? It's when a lot of the stimulus measures end. So the hope will be the lifting of restrictions combined with those measures going till the end of September quarter will be enough to get GDP up. But, I mean, look, we're looking at 3 quarters of negative growth now. There's no doubt about it. In fact, this quarter we're looking at 10% reduction in growth, according to Treasury. And, yeah, I mean, I feel how momentous this is, as Kieran was alluding to. This is the first recession for 29 years. 29 years in Australia. And no matter what's caused it, it's really bad news. And, you know, the unemployment follows. It always does. And it's awfully hard to get down. So there's a reason Scott Morrison and co and state premiers are out saying jobs, jobs, jobs every single press conference. That's where we're going. And after that, yeah, after that September quarter, there's another challenge again. How do you recover once you start tapering this stimulus off? I mean, I was thinking with the panic buying, they might be able to stave off this negative result for this quarter because, after all, the shutdowns only started March 23rd, Annalise. We only had 8 days of shutdowns and we've still ended up with a quarter of negative growth. And you can see one of the big contributors to that is the household saving ratio. It's gone from 3.5 to 5.5. Already people are trying to hang on to their money in this quarter. They're seeing the tidal wave coming. You know, what's happened in the next quarter in relation to that? You can see, therefore, why, when it came to the cash payments, they went to pensioners, they went to people on welfare, people that Treasury thought were going to go out and spend and stimulate the economy because everyone else is saving. And so, you know, you've got all these, you're being hit from every direction. If you're the government, you've got this, you've got a revenue cliff as well. You're not going to get the revenue. There's not the spending happening in the economy. There's all these job losses. It's just a terrible economic situation we're staring at. Thank goodness we've got over the health situation, but this economic situation is dire.
Ticky, Andrew raises a really interesting point there that so much of this is around confidence. Even if things are looking good, if people don't have the confidence to go out and spend, then things aren't going to recover as quickly as they need to. What do you think is going to be the big push in increasing that confidence in the coming months?
Well, look, I think that's right. And regardless, even if this number had come through positive for the March quarter, effectively, we are in a recession, as we were in 1973 with the oil shock when there was only 1 quarter of negative growth. And Andrew's right. It's about jobs. It's about levels of unemployment, which we're going to see getting worse. Now, it is interesting how the Reserve Bank is thinking about this and how the government is thinking about this. At the moment, we're hearing Phil Lowe, the Reserve Bank. By the way, he's never mentioned, I don't think he's mentioned the R word to this time. He's always talked about a contraction in the economy, and that's a message of confidence always coming from the Reserve Bank. He's a sunny side up kind of a guy. Now, he, at the moment, is not looking at negative rates. Negative rates for the Reserve Bank really is essentially forcing money back into the system because it's putting off banks parking their money with the RBA because they're not going to get a return. So that's one thing is not open to yet, but who knows whether that'll happen if things do get more dire down the track. As to what the government might do to instill confidence, the big question is what they will do with JobKeeper and JobSeeker. Indeed, that $60 billion that was committed and has now been corrected. To what extent? Ideas like Warwick McKibben's, which is perhaps having some sort of a HEX type thing for business and others. That in other words, if you're doing better, then the support moves away, but there will be a lot of support beyond September. These are the sorts of things that I think are going to bring confidence to the community.
And we did hear the government relaxing some of their rhetoric around extending JobKeeper in particular, that it's not necessarily that hard 6-month deadline. Kieran, do you think this is going to be prompting them to rethink that?
I think that it might not be extended in its current form. It will be, my assumption is that it will be for certain sectors that need it. The big thing for me for confidence, I think, in the back half of the year is going to be what the agenda, what the message is from the government in terms of how they're going to manage reform in October and with the budget. This is one of the most important budgets I can certainly remember in the 2 decades that I've covered politics. It is going to be so important. If we are going to set ourselves on another trajectory of long-running economic growth, this budget needs to be bold. They need to work with the states to get rid of the inefficient taxes that we have talked about day in, day out for so many years. They need to make things more efficient. They know what they need to do, but there are huge risks involved. But to be honest, a crisis, as they say, should not be wasted when it comes to reform. And I think that in itself, if you have leadership and you've got a bold agenda on that, that would bring people with them. I think inherently that would breed confidence. Another point to make, Annalise, in terms of being in a technical recession, I mean, you talk to economists. I know my friend Warren Hogan, the former chief economist at ANZ, he believes we've had recessions in recent times. Not, we haven't run 29 years without a recession, but the definition needs to change basically, because if you look at it today, say we did nudge over to barely, some 0.1% growth or something like that, as opposed to shrinking by 0.3%. Who in their right mind would think we're not in a recession? I mean, we lost 1 million jobs in 4 weeks. So maybe there's a time to look at a different metric about this as well. Maybe look at unemployment as the metric, as some other nations do when it comes to a recession. But either way, it's a very difficult time. We've known that. That's why we're seeing extraordinary stimulus being spent. But now this emergency response, Annalise, has to be followed by proper reform if we are going to achieve the wonderful, something like the legacy we saw of the reformers of the 80s and 90s. We need something again of that magnitude if we're going to get back on that trajectory of growth. And
Annalise, if I can just add to what Kieran said, they've got to keep spending. This concept that on September 30 you stop spending as a government and business can do all the heavy lifting. Well, Scott Morrison can do, and Josh Frydenberg can do that if they want, but watch what happens if you do. It's sort of anathema to a Conservative government that's worked so hard to try and get to that surplus figure. But there's no doubt that the spending programs will have to go on. And that's where you can flick the switch to infrastructure. And there's talk around government about that, big infrastructure. That's what needs to happen, and debt needs to rise. And money's cheap. They have to borrow. They have to go against Scott Morrison's natural instinct as a former Treasurer here and keep spending to get this economy back on track. I understand what Kieran's saying about reform, and I agree with it as a longer-term type of goal to sell into the next election, perhaps. That will change things up and get them revenue as we come out of this. But they really are going to have to keep spending. There's no way around that.